Good morning. And you had a long weekend, obviously. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
So good to see all of you again. And I'm happy that we are starting the last week of the foundation course. I hope that you will see by the time you finish it that it has been a very useful experience, I hope. And it will be something that will guide your work through the year at UPeace, but beyond that, all the way into how you will do your work in the field as you finish here. So wish you all the best. I saw some of the presentations on Friday, and I must say that I was really, really happy. Seriously. Good work to all of you. I feel like the concepts were clear. People knew how to use them, how to think of conflict dynamics, and how to think of what can be done. So if that was one of the objectives of the foundation course, then I believe that actually you have done a good job in making it happen. So thank you. Yes, big hand to all of you, really. And perhaps also what I noticed before you got to the to do your presentations, it is the kind of teamwork I have seen happening. Of course, I know teamwork in such activities is not that easy. That's when you start to understand actually yourself better, understand other people, you understand dynamics of how you communicate, how much your ego is big versus other people's ego is bigger than yours, and how do you compromise. So actually part of this activity is intended to help you to understand how those dynamics work, with one objective that we all want to have a good presentation that reflects that how we know what we have been studying. So it was impressive to come around every now and then and see all of you working so hard and so focused with your groups. That in itself was a big success. Today we start the third week of the class, and the focus for the whole week is on intervention. In the first week, we spoke about the basic concepts of peace and conflict. We discussed the different methods of how we analyze and how we understand conflict and peace. Second week, we had more of the different perspectives. How does gender fit into the picture? How does environment, humans, and food security get into it? Human rights, and so on, with that to help us understand causes, dynamics of conflict. We do all this for what purpose? We do all this for one purpose, which is how can we intervene? If you put me CRC Fabio for a second. Everything we've done with analyzing, understanding, was to go to number 7, to understand, so how do we intervene here? How can we, meaning what? When I ask what is intervention then? Intervention is the effort made to try to find a peaceful, call it resolution, call it transformation, call it management, whatever it is, or peaceful settlement of a conflict that is happening. And the assumption that we had for the last 2 weeks is you cannot do that if you don't understand how to analyze a conflict. I mean, just like a doctor cannot start to do a surgery if he or she does not know the diagnosis or understand what's going on. And that's what we were trying to do. Now, intervention means what? Many people will think intervention starts with an outsider, with somebody who is not part of the conflict will come and help people or parties in a conflict to resolve their conflict, which is to a great extent correct. And I believe most of the literature focuses on intervention as something that happens by an outsider, or somebody who's familiar with the conflict and has an interest for whatever reason or professional reason to come and deal with the conflict. Fine. But I want to argue also that intervention starts with the people in the conflict themselves. You cannot start, I don't think that you can easily resolve a conflict or effectively resolve a conflict if the individuals who are, or entities in the conflict have not embraced the notion of how do I deal with conflict in an effective way? And how can I change my behavior, my attitudes and feelings, my way of communicating? We explained when we talked about CRC Fabio how things get very difficult when 5 is so strong, leading to behavior that is negative, reciprocated by the other side, and we get into the vicious cycle of escalation, conflict escalation. For me, intervention starts when one or more of the parties in the conflict start to abandon that negative behavior and start to understand that there are ways I can still assert my 3 and 2 and 1, but without resorting to violent or negative behavior. This is the beginning of intervention. How does this happen in the conflict? Of course, there are many different directions that things will happen. Maybe I'll tell you like an example and that I saw in Liberia was, I think I mentioned before about Liberia, a country in West Africa. There were several factions fighting each other for about 5-6 years, and they were very vicious. The way they were killing each other, killing civilians, they just caused havoc. One group, one of the militias that was fighting there, was led by somebody, had given him, you know, many of them, just after they become strong militiamen, they just give themselves like titles, military titles. So they call themselves colonel or general. So there was this one guy who actually called himself, and excuse my bad language here, he called himself General Butt Naked. Butt Naked. That's the name he gave himself, Butt Naked. And of course, when you wonder, so why did you call himself General Butt Naked? And you can look him up, by the way. Anyone interested, you're going to be surprised to see that. You're not going to see the butt naked, but you're going to see the, I mean, you're going to see something about. All right. Now, so why did he call himself that? He called himself General Butt Naked because he and his militia would fight stripped completely from their clothes, and the only thing they are wearing is their boots, and they have their AK-47 or whatever machine gun they have. And they were so vicious in fighting against others, and they were known for eating the flesh of their enemies after they killed them. Talking about vicious stuff. Now, I was there when I learned about that story, but then I learned also that this guy had a total transformation. Until today, and again, that's why I say look him up on Google. He is one of the peace preachers in West Africa, all over Africa, or West Africa to be specific. And you know why of course, so I was saying, how do people change? In his case, and I'm not saying that's the only way to do this, but in his case, he said that he one night felt that Jesus entered his heart. I'm not a preacher here of Jesus, hallelujah. I'm not saying that, but I am just saying that this is one approach. He actually felt this transformation, spiritual transformation happened inside him that made him realize that what he was doing was wrong and he needed to abandon this. And that was the strongest motivation for him to abandon his ways and to turn into becoming a peace preacher. Other people I have seen among, for example, the violent extremists in Egypt that I worked with in the 80s. Some of them were as vicious as General Butt Naked. And they would go around and killing, blowing up, burning, believing that they are doing the right things. How did they justify this? From their own religious interpretations. I was stunned 20 years after to learn that some of those leaders of Islamic Jihad who killed Anwar Sadat and others, while they were in prison, they started to rethink their interpretations that led them to believe that violence was the right way as a good Muslim to assert yourself. And they came up with different interpretations that were about peaceful transformation and non-violence. And they actually, when they did this, the government supported them in this process of what we call doctrine revision, like revising the doctrine of violence into something peaceful. And many of them started to go into prisons doing workshops with younger jihadists, younger violent extremists. And according to estimates in research, they were able to transform 20,000 people from being very violent people into becoming advocates for peaceful transformation. I met some of them, and actually, and probably in the break, I'll put a clip from something that will be interest you. And we did a workshop in Africa, in Ethiopia one time. We brought youth from Europe and from Africa on violent extremism. And we brought one of those guys, a former jihadist, spent 25 years of his life in prison. I was the prosecutor, he was the convict. We became best friends now. And we went together to Ethiopia along with a converted white supremacist from Sweden. He also changed his ways of doing things. And together we led this workshop working with youth from both sides, from Africa and Europe, about how to do things to prevent violent extremism. What I want to communicate is intervention starts from within. And there are different ways how this will happen. It can happen by somebody has a spiritual awakening. Somebody realizes just pragmatically it's not in my interest to keep fighting. I need to just start to rethink this and find a different way to do it. Or somebody will re-examine their values and beliefs and find that, no, I need to change how I'm doing things. I just want to emphasize that notion. I don't want you to jump with intervention into it all starts with a third party coming to solve. We'll talk the rest of the day about that. But I want you to start with that intervention starts from within the person or the entity or the group of people who are fighting. When they abandon the negative behavior between 5 and 6 and thinking, let us think about something peaceful to deal with the conflict we are dealing with. And of course, one of the important things that you need to acquire and learn in order to reach this peaceful way of dealing with conflicts is how to articulate, how to communicate 3, 2, and 1. How not to, in every conflict you keep, I want this, and I am the right one, and you are the bad guy. Is there a way you can communicate, yes, still assert what you want, but do it in a way where you embrace the other as well, where you can make the other feel validated, legitimized, not shunned, not pushed away, and what I want is the only thing that is good here, everything else is bad? For me, this is really the key. It's, in other words, go back to the notion, no one wakes up in the morning thinking that he or she is a bad guy. How can we make more people learn to assert what they want while making the effort to understand how could the other one wake up thinking that they were right, and sincerely try to figure this out and then find a way to bridge between the two. And I always, of course, when I look at different documentaries or other sources, I'm always looking for things that I can illustrate such points with without me having to stand here and talk about it. And I was fortunate, and by the way, I'm always looking at like videos, movies, stuff like this for a good reason. Did I tell you that for my PhD dissertation, I got my doctorate by watching movies? I swear, I'm not joking. I wanted to look at conflicts in the Egyptian society. And I thought that how I'm going to do this. I'm not going to just wait for people to fight on the street and then say, wait, stop, let me take notes. I cannot do that. I cannot do like what we did here in the exercise when Hero came out and somebody's punching him. I say, stop, let me take notes. You cannot do that. So I had to find something to capture data that is as realistic as possible. So what I did is actually decided to use Egyptian movies. Some of them are very good. Egypt is like the Bollywood of the Middle East or the Hollywood of the world. It is for the Arabs. So I selected very carefully 11 movies and I analyzed them systematically using the earlier version of this model. And that's how I actually, and then out of that came up with some findings and themes, and I did interviews on them. And I got a PhD by doing that. So, so I'm always interested when I see some documentary, some movie, I look deeper to try to see what can help me in how we teach about peace and conflict. So I was lucky a couple of weeks ago to find actually a clip from an interview or from a town hall in the US with a representative, like a congressman, and he was asked a question about what he thought about American football players. Now, of course, let's be clear, American football. You know American football, it's not that soccer, right? I mean, Americans call football soccer. Right? The one that we know, the World Cup that we just watched, they call that what? Soccer. They call the game they play, that is by hand usually, they call it football. Why? We are not going to get into this, all right? That's a whole other story. We get to that later. So in American football, something happened 2-3 years ago with one player wanted to protest against the killing of black people, especially by police, and there is no justice, and so on. And he did this symbolically by refusing to stand when they do the national anthem in the beginning of every game, which is that's a tradition in the US. And usually when they do the national anthem, everybody will stand and put their hand up like that. He refused to do that, and instead he decided to kneel, or get down on his knee. And that was seen by some people as an insult to the flag, insult to the national identity, and insult to the veterans who are fighting, or the troops who are fighting wars for the sake of the safety of everyone in the US and so on. And then the movement grew. and more players started to get down on their knee when they play the national anthem. Trump got mad at them, other people got mad at them. So it became a big issue in the US. So this representative was asked a question about it. I want you now, in light of that notion I was talking about, that change starts from within and you have to acquire ways of how to assert what you want, but don't dismiss the other and find a way to bridge with the other. I thought, my goodness, this guy gave me a great video that I can share with people when I do such lectures. So we're going to watch that clip. It's about 4 minutes. I want you to listen to him. Look at his body language. Look at everything he's doing. In light of, it's a contentious situation. He's getting a question from someone who disagrees with him, and he finds a way to answer. As you see it, let us just discuss after that, what do you think he did that was really good or not good, in terms of moving from 5 and 6 of C.R.C. Papio into a more peaceful way of relating. Ready? Okay, let's go. From the beginning, yeah, gracias.
I kind of wanted to know how you personally felt about how disrespectful it is. Like you had the NFL players kneeling during the national anthems. I wanted to know if you found that disrespectful to our country, to our veterans, and anybody related to that. I find it incredibly frustrating that people seem to be okay with that, and I would just like to hear your input.
Thank you. Thanks for a great question. Again, on a really tough issue that if we don't talk about is not going to get better. And the question is, how do you feel about NFL players who take a knee during the national anthem? And is it disrespectful to this country, to the flag, to service members who are right there tonight, where it is tonight in Afghanistan, and those former service members, retirees, and veterans who are here with us today? Thank you each for your service. My short answer is no. I don't think it's disrespectful. Here's my longer answer, but I'm going to try to make sure that I get this right, because I think it's a really important question. And reasonable people can disagree on this issue. Let's begin there. And it makes them no less American to come down on a different conclusion on this issue, right? You can feel as a young man does, you can feel as I do, you're every bit as American, all the same. But I'm reminded, somebody mentioned reading the Taylor Branch book. You did. Parting the Waters and the King Years. And when you read that book and find out what Dr. King and this nonviolent, peaceful movement to secure better, because they didn't get full, civil rights for their fellow Americans, the challenges that they faced, those who died in Philadelphia, Mississippi, for the crime of trying to be a man, trying to be a woman in this country, the young girls who died in the church bombing, those who were beaten within an inch of their life crossing the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma, Alabama with John Lewis, those who were punched in the face, spat upon, dragged out by their collar at the Woolworth lunch counter for sitting with white people at the same lunch counter in the same country where their fathers may have bled the same blood on the battlefields of Omaha Beach or Okinawa or anywhere that anyone ever served this country. The freedoms that we have were purchased not just by those in uniform, and they definitely were, but also by those who took their lives into their hands riding those Greyhound buses, the Freedom Riders in the Deep South in the 1960s, who knew full well that they would be arrested, and they were serving time in the Mississippi State Penitentiary. Rosa Parks getting from the back of the bus to the front of the bus, peaceful, nonviolent protests, including taking a knee at a football game to point out that black men, unarmed, black teenagers, unarmed, and black children, unarmed, are being killed at a frightening level right now, including by members of law enforcement, without accountability and without justice. And this problem, as grave as it is not going to fix itself. And they're frustrated, frankly, with people like me and those in positions of public trust and power who have been unable to resolve this or bring justice for what has been done and to stop it from continuing to happen in this country. And so nonviolently, peacefully, while the eyes of this country are watching these games, they take a knee to bring our attention and our focus to this problem to ensure that we fix it. That is why they are doing it, and I can think of nothing more American than to peacefully stand up or take a knee for your rights anytime, anywhere, any place. So thank you very much for asking the question. I appreciate it.
He is representative, I think last name is Uruk, and he is a candidate for the Senate from Texas, Democrat. I'm sorry? Running against Ted Cruz. Okay, great. Lights, can you turn the light? Okay, now, yeah, I'm glad you put this back. Now, I want you to think, if you were the guy who asked him the question, so you are the other party in this conflict, right? The guy who started with the question said, what do you think? I think it's disrespectful, da 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 da. And then, I think it's Rick, his name, answering him. If you were the one who asked the question, do you feel that he insulted you at all? Okay, tell me how you felt about the way he responded. What caught your attention in how he responded in this situation? Yes?
He was very inclusive.
Yeah, please tell me more about this.
I don't know how to expound on it, but he was inclusive of, well, he was including everyone that was American on this side, that side. We can disagree, it's okay.
That's right. Yeah, he validated the other. He said that this is an important issue. He did not dismiss the issue. He did not say what I say is important, yours is not. No, he started by making sure that the other side is included, and with respect and with dignity and with validation of what he thought. And he said that it's a big issue, we can be on different sides of it, and that is okay. There is nothing wrong with that. That's inclusion, that's validating the other, not pushing them and say, what do you know? Excellent. What else he did that or said that you felt reflected a behavior that we think we should follow to make a resolution of conflict more peaceful? Anything he did? Yes.
He started by thanking veterans to show that they have the same values for veterans.
So again, he's kind of making sure there's a common ground with everybody. He's not alienating anyone. Everyone is included. Good. Anything else? Yes.
He made it clear that the issue wasn't just oh, it's disrespectful to the flag or the national anthem. He was able to speak very quickly and succinctly about why this is a larger issue and why it's.
That's right. That's right. Yes.
He referred to history that everyone knows in America?
That you, and very often you will agree with. It's not so he built, again, common ground through history. Yes?
He reaffirmed that even by asking the question, you're still American, and that is an important subject that needs to be talked about.
Excellent, excellent. Again, talking about identity, we have a shared identity, and this should not take, and as a matter of fact, we are better American by disagreeing here and discussing. And look how many times he used the word nonviolent and peaceful. How many times he used that word? Yes, Red. Red, I know.
Yeah, I was about to mention that he really belabored nonviolent, peaceful, and drew the connection between kneeling as a protest to Martin Luther King.
Very good.
I thought that was really interesting because you really listen to what he's doing. He's saying, well, you don't want to stop these guys from kneeling. You don't want to stifle any protest as disrespectful. Then you're just getting rid of nonviolent options.
That's right.
That was sort of the subtext of what he was saying.
Yeah.
As I understood it.
And you're right. The way he kept talking about the historical nonviolent action that everyone agrees on, and I think all Americans take pride in, and I think the whole world, and then saying, well, the kneeling is just one form of this. It is a continuation of the nonviolent acts we have seen from the 60s and on. So I think, yes, by doing this, he gave legitimacy to this, but asserting the nonviolence approaches. Another thing that struck me in what he said is, let me ask you a question. Do you think that he budged on anything that he stood up for? Did he compromise on what he thought should be done or what is right? That's for me is the key. When we say use nonviolent approaches, when we say that resort to peaceful approaches, Nobody is telling you in any conflict that try to lower what you think you should stand up for. It is how you do it. It is how you approach it. And for me, intervention starts here. It's how am I going to assert what I want and explain why it is important, and in the process, give legitimacy and validation for the other. And then let the process start from here. And hopefully the other will do the same. If we can get to that point that parties are able to discuss an issue between them with this kind of understanding, can you imagine how far it will take us versus if they are too busy asserting, I am right, you are wrong, and I'm going to use all my resources and mobilize to assert what I want against you? This is the difference between what we discussed in the first 2 weeks and what we want to discuss this week. Another element that interested me in this video is when he said, when he first started, after he gave validation to the question and to others, he said, my short answer is, what happened with the audience when he said that? They applaud a lot. Now, if many people in that moment, when they feel, oh my God, I have a lot of support, my opinion captured the support of the audience, he could have gone in the wrong direction at that moment. He could have started to say, so what you're saying is wrong, and we are the right one, and so on, because he knows the audience, at least in this case, is with him. But he didn't. He did not let that audience support change his way of how to communicate it in a peaceful manner and to relate to the other also. And he ended this whole thing by saying what? Again, thank you very much for your answer or question. I think it's a role model in addition, somebody alerted when we did this on Saturday in that workshop, we used this video on negotiations, and somebody noted that when he used his hand to talk about the movements of the 60s, he did not use, for example, a fist like this. He had his hand always open whenever he did this, so which is kind of give a gesture of inclusion, back to the point, not a notion of challenging or fighting against somebody. I feel that, yes.
I was going to say, I think it's significant too at the end when he started to speak about how ultimately the youth and the African American population is in turn mad at politicians.
Yes.
Being one and being a white politician, I think that's significant because although he brought up the fact that these are nonviolent actions, these are actions by the minorities that are still being excluded from national dialogue until a white person speaks about them.
Yeah.
So why is it that those actions speak louder than, or those words speak louder than our actions?
Yeah, I think, maybe this is part of the assertion that I appreciated about him. At the end, he blamed, he said it is the people in power. I guess that's the point you are getting to, that how he spoke about.
But he included himself too.
Include himself, yes.
Like me.
People.
Yeah, we're mad at politicians. I think any person of color in the United States is.
By the way, no, when he said including
Included himself in the
who are people I'm mad at. Yes, excellent, which. Yeah, so interestingly, where he placed himself as a party in this, as he is part of the group that is being blamed for this. I think a lot of lessons you can get from this. I am sure there are many other things similar you can, if you keep an eye as you are working in different settings, in what good examples of how we can start to intervene as an individual, how can I change the way I do things? And again, without budging on what I think is important. For me, that is the key for how we can do effective interventions in conflict. From there, what I like to, can we go to the agenda of today? What I would like to do today, yes, is we already spoke about, I think I made my case clear here, where does intervention start? And from here, I want to talk about those 4 things. I want to talk about ethics of intervention. I mean, how do we intervene, with what worldview, with what objective? There are, and you will see that depending on how I assess a situation, there will be some form of intervention or the other, guided by my principles and what change I want to effect. And then we'll talk about the continuum of intervention. There are different forms of intervention, depending on how much we let the parties in the conflict decide what they want versus somebody else is coming and telling them what you should be doing. And all the way into nonviolent action and trying to actually enforce what you think is right or effect a change on the contextual level or relationship level. Finally, 2 types of interventions that are very, of course, common and popular worldwide are mediation and negotiations. So I would like to address those 2 as well. briefly. Many of you will get more in-depth classes on mediation and negotiations. But we will just touch the surface and see how they can be useful techniques in doing this. For the ethics of intervention, so we go, and by the way, we are printing them. I think Shirley should be coming any minute, and she will give, oh, you already have them. Thank you. Yes, please. That's the right time. Perfect timing. So we're going to start by talking about the ethics of intervention. I'm sure that many of you are aware that, like when you saw that representative talking, okay. Okay, actually, while we're finishing this one, I need to alert you that we are making an adjustment to the schedule today. We will not have seminars today. Is this good or bad? I'm not sure it's a good or a bad thing. All right, but it doesn't mean you're going to go to the beach, okay? No. So we will stay in this session. We'll take the break on time, and then we'll come back again. But I would like to give you about half-hour time for questions on anything that we discussed for the last 2 weeks, because this is my last presentation for you. I'll be here but I'm here for the week. All right, Oprah. I know Oprah Winfrey. All right. Oh, wow. Okay, that is so nice. And I, by the way, there is another. I keep jumping, but allow me to jump one more time. I would like to introduce a guest, a very special guest we have with us today. My wife, Shermeen, is sitting in the back here. Maybe stand up. So, of course, I told her, but when I proposed to her, I said, will you marry me? What did she do? What did she do? She did like that, right? No, that's not true. Yeah. And by the way, we are actually in the celebration of our 20th anniversary. So, yeah. Yeah. Okay, so, and then she'll be here today, and if you'd like to talk with her, she's here, and I'll try to convince her to come back a couple of more times while I'm here this week. And so I will be here for the whole week, and my office hours from 2 to 3 are happening all the way through Friday, so until the last day of class. It's just my presentations end today. So that's why I thought it would be a good idea. I asked the facilitators if I can infringe on their time with you, and to take more time to speak about intervention, and then allow half an hour for any questions that you may have or reflections we can discuss at the end. And we'll still finish on time at 11:45. Is this okay? All right, thank you. All right, so the first thing I want to talk about today, already that we spoke about intervention from within, intervention that happens from inside you and how you change. We want to talk also about, so if I am coming to intervene as a third party, we already know now the term third party means what? It means somebody who's coming from outside, and I'm going to explain what does outside mean, how distant from people or parties he or she should be or not. That's a big question coming later when we talk about types of mediators. But when we speak about the ethics of intervention, we mean if I am walking into a situation, and I find that the parties in the conflict, they seem to have equal understanding and equal power in the situation. They are just varying on some interests that they are disagreeing. Somebody wants to buy something, but they are not buying it for the right price. The other one is disagreeing. Or two entities, say two groups living around the river, and there is not enough water, or so they think. And they are disagreeing on how to distribute the water between them. So you have questions here about how can you go in and try to find a way to distribute the water between them, or find a price that is acceptable to both of them. This is one form of intervention, and we'll explain it. But this will be different from if I am trying to intervene, like you remember the husband and the wife, and they disagreed about spending the money, and the husband started to bring up his own gender dynamics and his male domination and so on. If you are in a conflict situation and you find that there is an issue bigger than simply how to mediate the interests, if it is something like that representative was talking about, there is social injustice happening. There is a treatment of a whole group of people that is unfair. How is mediation? I mean, I'm going to go and to ask a police officer, how can you just shoot a little bit less than what you shoot? No, it's not about that. You need a transformation of the contextual factors and the relationship. You need something deeper to affect a change. Or the husband who doesn't understand how to treat his wife with dignity and with respect and with on equal grounds, he definitely needs not only to solve the problem of should I buy a car or paint a house. That's only one issue. But he needs some deeper intervention, or both of them need a deeper intervention and empowerment for the woman in this case, or empowerment for groups that are discriminated against, abused, and so on. And that requires a different form of intervention. And a third model that I like to bring to your attention will be, no matter what the issue is, how do you intervene when you actually have very strong relationships, bond between the parties and also with the person who is intervening? When there is a strong common good, a sense of common good, almost like also the threat when he said, we are all American, we are all sharing in this. When this is the case, especially in more traditional settings, can I just intervene as a distant person, or my intervention should build upon the reality that we are connected and we are sharing in a common good and a common understanding of our culture and what should be done? Those, for me, are three large categories of intervention. I'll try to put them in a language that is easier to comprehend and apply to reality. And we give them three headings: the professional approach, the empowerment approach, and the common good approach. The professional approach refers to what? It refers to the very basic, I would say, intervention as a mediator or third party, when you are not worried about dynamics of power or dynamics of domination or injustice. You are just worried about how can I get the two parties to know how to talk to each other and to understand their interests, not to get stuck on the positions, and to find options to satisfy those interests in a mutual way. Sometimes people are so stuck in the emotion, stuck in the escalation, they cannot get to know how to talk to each other about numbers 3 and 2 in CRC Fabio, the position and the interest. So you need somebody from outside to come and help them talk to each other. And often when this is needed, you use, especially in the North American approach and in Europe and in some other countries now started to grow, you need a professional trained mediator or arbitrator, somebody who has training, who is certified properly by the government, by the court, and he or she will be the one who will come and do this kind of intervention according to specific guidelines and specific rules about how you do your mediation or other form of intervention. When this is the case, a professional type of intervener is typically somebody who doesn't have a relationship with the parties. As a matter of fact, he or she should not have a relationship with the parties. And if they have a relationship with the parties, then they should actually recuse themselves. They need to pull out of this and find somebody else who doesn't have that kind of relationship. Because the assumption here is you have party A, party B, and they have a conflict, and they need somebody who's not going to be biased or going to be partial to one side or the other. A previous relationship very likely will disrupt that. So you want to make sure that the professional mediator is somebody distant and somebody who can come in and only focus on the issues in a just manner, fair manner, without being biased to one side or the other. Great, and I'm sure this is an excellent model that can work in many conflicts. But the risk is to think that this is the only way we intervene. And definitely it is not the only one. Yes, it has its own space. Many conflicts can be resolved in this manner. But what do you do when actually there are questions of power, questions of justice, questions of groups? Yes?
So if that mediator is not done, my question is, if that mediator comes from the non-related for that issue, he or she might not know the real deep conflicts that is happening between the two parties. So how would the mediator could be solve it justically?
Yes,
Because they might not have the like
the knowledge
knowledge about what is really happening.
happening. But, well, that's why assessment is the first step that they will do. They need to understand what's happening in the conflict, whether they review documents, whether they talk to the parties, whatever works in the situation, in order to get as much information, and then based on this, determine how they will intervene to try to help the parties to solve the problem. So yes, you cannot jump and do mediation without doing an assessment to say what's going on, what happened, and why, and so on. You have to do this assessment first before you get into the actual mediation. But ultimately, the assumption in this professional model of intervention is that the third party is someone who's coming as a professional, not as a friend, not as a family member, not as somebody we know in the community. No, this person is coming in a professional manner and with clear understanding that there is no previous relationship with the parties. And then they would do their assessment and then do the actual intervention. But then again, what if you walk into a situation like this, and that happened in many places in the world, and then you find that one party in the conflict is actually very disempowered, or that party in the conflict is so weak and abused almost by the other party, whether because of poverty, because of ethnic dimensions, no matter whatever it is, or labor conflicts. I mean, that was a big issue for labor management negotiations. It always becomes a big issue, that if labor is feeling desperate for their money and their job, and they are not up to the same level of power like the management, how can we really do real professional intervention if you actually know somebody is very weak and vulnerable and they cannot really negotiate on equal terms? So whenever you feel that equal terms is not there, then what we need is an empowerment approach. We need an approach that will help us to make sure we rebalance the relationship between the parties and the dynamic of power, so that we can ensure that if we move to the professional intervention, that we have corrected the injustice. And this is where you find actually, well, then intervention in terms of mediation may be harmful, because you have a weak party who's too scared and doesn't want to lose their job. So if the management say, well, too bad, we know the inflation is 6%, but with the best we'll give you is 1% raise. You don't like it, leave. You have a family, you are desperate, you don't have another job, there is economic problems. You are not going to walk away from your job. You will probably accept it because you are too vulnerable. Or if you are from a group in the society that is always looked like, remember the story of the woman who slapped the other woman? Look at the vulnerability of that poor woman. And of course, I appreciate her because she stood up for herself. But imagine how many others get slapped, and the pattern that they are used to do is to say, I'm sorry, ma'am, and try to just survive. When this is the case, then ethically, that's why we're talking about ethics of intervention. Are you going to just get in and be a mediator and say, I don't care, it's not my problem how much there is power imbalance and someone is abusing somebody? Or you may question yourself and say, wait a minute, I am driven by ethics here. And if this is, I'm feeling that the condition is not conducive for professional mediation, then probably I need to move from being a third party and become a secondary party and empower the one who is weak and go on the street and demonstrate and do like this representative was talking, that we got to correct those stuff before we can get into some reasonable form of mediation or negotiation. Yes, there are times, and I'm sure many of you, that you have taken to the street, you demonstrated, you stood up, and hopefully non-violently, in order to assert that there is a question of injustice that needs to be corrected. This is also a form of intervention. But you can be very clever as somebody educated in peace and conflict to know when is the right time to move from third party to become a secondary party supporting the weaker, versus moving back again to third party when you feel that the condition has changed enough that now I can get them to talk to each other. So I don't want you, in all this we are teaching about the negotiation, mediation, and all those forms of how to resolve a conflict between two or more parties, to forget about activism and advocacy as important approaches to correct the wrong if you determine that this is what's going on in a situation. We are not dismissing them, but we want you to know when to use it and to be strategic about it and to know how to move back to a more conciliatory approach between the parties. There is a way you can move back and forth. Yes, sir?
I have a question, because you're saying that
Power, yeah.
Relationship between the parties, and like you support one to like kind of empower it, but then if you move back to a more conciliatory approach, wouldn't that like be
Very
considered
good.
as bias at some point?
Excellent. Yes, it can. And in this case, perhaps you need to tell yourself that I see injustice here. I am not going to keep on playing the third party role. I decided to sacrifice that role and insist on the role of empowering, knowing very well that I will no longer be the right one to come back and play the third party. Sometimes the case, sometimes not, by the way. If that's the case, that now that you polluted yourself by taking one side, that's fine. Then let somebody else play the third party role. But you can go home and sleep and feel good about yourself because you did not compromise on issues of justice and empowerment. But if you insist on playing the third party role, when you know there is injustice and that poor woman who got slapped is just saying, yes, I agree because I don't want to lose a job, can you really go home and feel good about yourself, or you will realize that I am just becoming a tool in reinforcing and regenerating the same injustice to a group or the other? Keep that in mind. And yes, at the expense of being a third party that is neutral and seen as the right one, be it. Let somebody else play that role. Absolutely. So that's, again, it's a matter of ethics. It's a matter of how do you assess from your own standpoint as a human being, is this the right way to go into a conflict and do things, or there are other things to consider? And then the third one is, perhaps it is a combination of the two, the previous two, except it has here the relationship dynamic, the bond in CRC Pabio is very strong between the parties and between the third party. And this may, while this may not sound like, okay, that's what happened in industrialized societies, but guess what? That's what's happening maybe in 70% of the world. People live in rural areas, live in traditional contexts, and the bond between them is very strong. And there are people in the community who are appreciated for their status, their knowledge, their history, whatever it is, that makes them the right people to come and solve problems. Regardless of how close they are or having a previous relationship with the parties or not. As a matter of fact, I have seen, and I'm sure many of you who are familiar with more traditional context, you know that there can be a conflict between, say, Hero and, remind me of your name? Hannah. Hero and Hannah, and they have a conflict in their community, and I am Hero's brother. But Hannah knows that I am a man of principles, and that I am somebody who, if I come into this conflict to try to resolve it, I will do what is right, and I will help both of them. It doesn't matter that I am his brother or not. It's not about the previous relationship like in the first model. It is about who is credible in the eyes of the parties, who will provide the best arrangement to resolve the conflict in a way that they will feel good about it. But here, the prerequisite for this to happen is a common good, a shared value, stronger sense of shared values and shared bond between them. I am sure as you move forward in your studies in the peace and conflict, you will understand why this is important to emphasize, because we often stress in the literature the first model, the professional intervention, which is great, I love it. But I also know that in many societies, reality on the ground is not number one, not the first model, the professional model. Reality on the ground is a common good model, that people have shared values and they want to live by them, and they actually don't have that expectation of a third party coming and just trying to help them to talk, but instead they expect you to actually come and give your opinion what you think the solution is. And they trust it based on their values that this is a good thing for them because it comes from a credible person. You can also critique this model, definitely, but it exists in most parts of the world, and we need to be aware of it and to know how to activate it, how to make it work well, and especially how to improve it so that it becomes aware of the second model, the empowerment one. So I don't want an elderly man comes in a community and Hero fighting Hannah, husband and wife, and he's abusing her, or I'm the man, I do blah, 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 blah. And I come as the old man and say, those are our norms and those are our values in our society, and Hannah, you should respect it. And then just because I am the good man, you say, because you came my uncle here, then fine, I'm going to listen. No, then we are reproducing the injustice. What we need to do is to find a way that we respect the common good, respect the cultures with their own values, but find where things are no longer valid in respecting the other groups, other people, based on gender and based on other considerations. For me, those are three large ethical dimensions or directions for how we intervene. As you do your work, you're going to find that you will navigate between those three based on your assessment and what can work best here or there. Any questions on this before I move to the next one? Okay, let's go now to the one. Can you show me those files? We'll go to the continuum. Where is the continuum? No, not this one. No, it's a no. This one. Yeah. Now, one important approach related to all this in terms of how we intervene, especially in the first and the third model, the model of professional interventions, or also the models of a common good approach. The question here is, to what extent do parties have the control on the decision when they enter into some form of mediation or some form of whatever form of conflict management or resolution, versus how a third party is taking the control, or if the control is back again in the hand of one party over the other. So this continuum is arguing that to the extent that the decision how to solve a problem is in the hands of the parties of the conflict themselves, then there is conflict avoidance. I don't agree with, but I keep it here because the author had written it. That conflict, my decision to walk away from a conflict, not to be part of it, is a decision I made. So it is my decision, nobody imposed it on me. But I question that one. I prefer to start from the informal discussion and problem solving to negotiation and mediation. Those three approaches are approaches where, yes, you have a third party, somebody, even the first one, negotiations, is happening typically between the parties themselves. So Hannah and Hero start to talk to each other about how to solve a problem between them. Two countries go to negotiation and talk to each other and so on, without a third party helping them. That's what distinguishes negotiation from mediation. In negotiations, and also in the first one, which is the informal discussions and problem solving, the assumption is this is happening by the parties themselves. Mediation, in the very professional sense, is happening by a third party, but the third party here is not telling people what to do. A mediator, according to this chart, is what we call the North American type of mediator. And that terminology comes from the fact that the mediation as a sub element of our teaching about peace and conflict has developed academically from North America, reflected the North American model that embraces individualism, embraces freedom of choice as the core values. As such, you want parties in the conflict to have as much control on the decision what to do, not to have somebody come and tell people, here is what is the right answer. Here is how you should solve a problem. That is coming later. But for mediation, in the very North American sense, my job as a mediator is really to facilitate communication between the parties. I want you to know how to speak to the other side, to help them move from positional arguments that are difficult and control emotions, and help them to know how to talk about their interests and how to satisfy them, and have them articulate them the way they want to articulate them. You don't try to impose your language on people. You don't impose what is important for them. Let them choose what is important for them. Accordingly, they are the ones who come up with the solutions that they think will work for them. There is a beautiful logic for this, and the good arguments based on those values of individualism and freedom of choice that can explain why this is the proper way to do mediation, of course, in the North American setting. And that's why you see here mediation is put under the category of private decision making by parties. In other words, up to that point, third parties are not imposing their own decision on people. Instead, it is made by the parties themselves. In the second category, there's a private third-party decision-making. In other words, now we move to a next level of third-party intervention where I am not just a North American mediator who coming and say, so explain, Hannah, what is the problem and why you're feeling like this, and you tell us what is important and so on, and then we go back and forth helping you to talk to each other in a civil way and understand deeper dimensions of the conflict until you find a solution. That is a very classic mediation that we know from a North American perspective. But in the two models we have is administrative decision and arbitration. Whether it is administrative decision or arbitration, here I am a third party. Assume that now the conflict is not between husband and wife, it was between, say, two people working at UPs. And that happened to me a lot when I was the vice rector here. I mean, I would say a lot of, often people will come to me with conflicts between the staff, and I would try to help them still first to do find a solution that works according to the policies and regulations. But when all fails, we have a university to run, and we have to open the classroom every day, and we have to keep things going. So we cannot sacrifice that because two people don't know how to work together. So I may have to come up with a decision as an administrator and say, well, this is how we're going to do things. After you exhaust the possibilities that they can solve the problem on their own. Arbitration works in the same way. And those who go to the study in the international law departments, of course, you're going to get classes about arbitration as it happens in the international context. And that is about what? It's about, yes, a third party coming, but not as a mediator. The third party, called arbitrator here, is agreed upon by the parties. They sign an agreement that, yes, we will make you an arbitrator who will look at the case, understand our arguments, and make a decision that we will abide by. That is arbitration. So here, the parties willingly give their power of making a decision to a third party who will come and tell them, based on what you told me and what they told me, this is the right way to do it. A very famous example of this was when Egypt and Israel finally signed a peace treaty in 1979. They resolved everything about Israelis leaving the occupied land of Sinai, Egyptians taking over a peace. They signed a peace treaty. Now we're going to not have war anymore. But there was one small piece of Sinai called the Taba, T-A-B-A, that they did not agree on. They couldn't agree on up to the point that they signed everything in the peace treaty. So they agreed that, okay, on Taba, we will move it to arbitration. So they did, and they worked for 10 years on arbitration of the case of Taba. And the Egyptians provided their own legal arguments, historical arguments, why this is our land. The Israelis provided their own arguments as well. And at the end, the arbitration agency or entity gave the decision for Egypt. However, I think even before reaching that decision, the Israelis knew very well that the decision will go in favor of Egypt. So they resorted back to actually negotiations. And they negotiated together, all right, we know it's your land, you'll get the land. Why don't we work on it? We have a hotel already here. Actually, that's what happened. The Israelis built a hotel. They were making some good money out of it, and the resort. They did not want to lose much of the control or the money they are getting out of it, so they had a good arrangement with the Egyptians. How about if we keep the management for us, and you can, I can't remember the details, but it's interesting that arbitration, they knew they're going to go in one direction. They preferred to resort back to negotiations because both of them gained better by negotiating and making their own decisions. But arbitration, that's a very classic case in the literature about Taba and how it was dealt with. There are many cases worldwide about arbitration, how it was used. Arbitration also is a very effective way of dealing with labor issues and many other types of conflicts. But again, what you see here is an arbitrator is not someone that will let you decide what is right. No, they take the full control, and usually it is based on legal arguments that they will decide. Different from the third one, which is the legal, public, authoritative, third-party decision-making. Here we're talking about courts. We're talking about the court. You go by the law, and they tell you, here is the decision. And I will say that, as a matter of fact, this whole field of mediation and embedded within peace and conflict probably emerged as a reaction to the adversarial judicial processes. The adversarial processes that, when you go to court, you are bound by a law and a judge, and often, culturally, lawyers and prosecutors and judges. Well, of course, our judge, I would respect that they are impartial, neutral. But if it's a civil case, then you have two lawyers arguing for each side. If you go to a criminal case, you have a prosecutor and you have a defense lawyer. In all cases, the culture of this profession is about, I'm going to make my argument the strongest at the expense of your argument, to the point that the judge will see that I am the one closer to the application of law, and they will rule in favor of me. Or if I'm the prosecutor, I will do my best to show that why you committed the crime and how and so on, so that you will get a verdict of guilty. The defense lawyer is doing the opposite. They call that the adversarial model. Adversary means what? Like somebody against somebody and fighting back and forth. And again, talking about movies, I'll tell you about a movie that really struck me as excellent example of understanding why those adversarial approaches can be damaging to the long-term relationship between people, and it's not necessarily the right way to solve problems, and it is better sometimes to leave things in the hands of people if they have the right tools to know how to talk to each other. And it's an American movie from the 70s. It was called The Kramer versus Kramer. You are too young, all of you, of course, to remember the movie. But you can look it up. It's called The Kramer versus Kramer. And it was Dustin Hoffman and Meryl Streep. In that movie, they were married. They have a little child. And they got divorced. And Meryl Streep in the movie, she kind of felt like she needed to discover herself, to know herself better, and wanted to travel. I think they lived in New York. She decided to go to California. And she agreed to let go of the custody of the child to her divorcee. So Dustin Hoffman, as a father, he was raising this 2-year-old or 3-year-old kid, and she moved away to wherever she went. And he kept taking care of the child and raising him, and everything is going fine. Then she came back after a couple of years or 3, and she said, I think I am now got a hold of myself, I am fine, and I want my child back. And he said, what? After all this? No, I have the child, I'll keep the child. And so they went to court. So the court looked at the case of custody. Each of them had a lawyer. And each of them, as they were preparing the case, so they go to the husband and tell him, give me whatever you have to prove, number one, that you are a good father, and give me anything you know about her to prove that she's a bad mother. And the lawyer of the mother is doing the same thing. Tell me any detail that will be used in the court to show that he is not a good father, and tell me also everything about you that we can show that you are a good mother. So imagine with that mindset, the two lawyers are going to the court. Each one of them is busy trying to show that my client is a good parent and the other client is a terrible one. In one scene in that movie, actually 2 scenes, the lawyer say of Hannah was cross-examining Hero. You know, in the American system, first you bring a witness or somebody like the husband or the wife, and then your lawyer will ask you questions that are usually very nice to show how good you are. And then they do cross-examination, meaning that the other lawyer of the other side now will start to find everything wrong with you. That's their job. So the lawyer for Hannah started to ask Heroes all those questions and find all those details of things that happened to show that he was a negligent father or he did not do a good job in raising the child. Like, oh, isn't it true that one time he was on the playground and that you were not paying attention to him and he fell off the swing and hurt his head? And so he was trying to like, yes, but what happened? No, yes or no, true or false? Just say yes or no. And then, yes. And then, isn't it true that, I mean, he kept cornering him. And then the same thing from the other lawyer towards the wife. Is it true? And yes, no. And each one of them is trying to be harsh on the other to show that they are wrong. At one scene, Dustin Hoffman felt sympathetic with his wife the way that she was being cross-examined and made to look so ugly and terrible as a mother. That Dustin Hoffman turned to the lawyer and said to him, did you really have to go this harsh on her? And the lawyer turned to him and said, do you want your child or not? And winked to him like that. Wink. That's wink, right? Like wink. Yeah. And then what happened later, the same thing happened now to him. Now he gets on the stand and he gets cross-examined and he is tarnished by the lawyer of his wife. The wife felt so bad that after they finished in the court and he was walking out of the court, she ran after him And she said, I'm so sorry that he had to talk to you like this. Imagine that the adversarial system exceeded the lawyers and their interest in how to deal with the case, exceeded in terms of hostility where the parties themselves were. I thought that what a moment. Watch the movie. I think that in the last 15 minutes you can see that scene. And as a result, even though the court ruled in favor of the wife, and so that the husband now was sitting and preparing, the scene came that at the end he's now preparing his son, telling him, listen, you're going to go with your mom, she loves you, and he's packing his stuff for him to go live with his mom. She came to his door and she said to him, no, after all this, and having come to your place a couple of times, I realize that you have made a home for him here. This is home for him. The last thing I want is to take him away from his home. And she actually did not abide by the court decision, and they preferred that he stays with his father because it was in the best interest of the child. I know that's emotional for some of you, I know. Watch the movie, but for me it highlights to you that why do we have mediation? Why do we seek to do all the stuff about conflict resolution? Because the other option is really this adversarial approach. That yes, sometimes it brings justice. Sometimes it's the only way to achieve justice or to get to what you think is right for yourself. I am not dismissing this. But I'm also saying that if we only have that approach, then we are missing on a lot that we can do using non-adversarial approaches such as mediation and negotiation and so on. So that approach we have here is the legal authoritative one, is about whether the legislative authorities, the parliament, Congress in any country makes a decision which changes the law. You no longer can discriminate in schools. You cannot have a school for blacks and one for white. Or you cannot discriminate against women and so on. That is a law that changes the reality on the ground. Or you go to a court and the court will say, I rule in favor of this or that. And then the last one is the extra-legal coercive decision-making. That's interesting. Here, now as I mentioned, the decision here was in the hand of the parties, right? Here it moved to third party to make the decision for you. Now it is back in the hands of the parties, but more in terms of how you're going to influence the other party, whether non-violently or use force, war. Real politics. We don't like to think that we have to resort to violence or war in order to achieve what we want, but it is the reality. If everything fails and I still believe that I have the right for something and I have the power to do it, probably I will resort to violence. What we hope to do in this whole field is to be between the non-violence to the informal and discussion, the discussion and problem solving. Meaning, as much as possible, keep the decision in the hands of the parties if they can. If not, put it in the hand of third party to make a fair decision. But don't wait. And if there is injustice, as we mentioned, and you need empowerment, use the non-violent approach. But of course, we don't want people to reach non-violence or to use violence or to walk away from a conflict when they really think they have something because of weakness or so or something like that. And it is 10 o'clock sharp now. So why don't we take the 20-minute break now and come back 10:20. We'll go until about 11 or so. And then after that, we'll open for question and discussion. All right? You had your hand or you're stretching? Stretching. Okay, good. 20 minutes.